8, 9. I got a 9 for chemistry, let's go.
Yeah, same.
Bloody hell. I got a 9 for computing. And for swear down, I got a 9 for computing.
The excitement of having done better than you'd hoped.
9, a 7. I bought an RE.
Was it better than you thought?
Yeah, it's a nice surprise.
How are you feeling?
I just feel like all the hard work we've done like over the years has just paid off in this result, and yeah,
it's so relieving. Like when you open it.
A relief not just for Rishi and his friends, but for their parents who are waiting nervously outside.
Don't cry again. Oh my God.
We've been following this academy in Leicester throughout the pandemic. This year, there's been another rise in GCSE results. In England, Wales and Northern Ireland, those getting grades 7 and above, the equivalent of A's and A stars, is nearly 30%, compared to 26% last year. Although it's a record, it's well below the rise seen in A-level grades earlier this week.
I got an 8 in literature. I got an 8 in literature and an 8 in drama.
Grades that mean even more to Viante Sodu, given the struggles she faced during the pandemic.
You struggled with your mental health during lockdown.
The pandemic was hard. I struggled with my mental health a lot. It was just the whole concept of being at home every day and just that isolation was quite difficult.
Her friend Tia was getting her BTEC results. Like so many others, Tia didn't have a laptop in lockdown and had to borrow one from the school.
My teachers helped me and supported me a lot.
What did you struggle with?
I struggle with just staying focused at home because there's a lot of distractions around me.
Really, really good. Absolutely smashed it. I can't believe it.
Sharing their joy, head teacher Gulbanu Kader, she's had to steer her students through the disruption and disorder of COVID.
It is a celebration of the nation's teachers and leaders and the extraordinary work that they've done over the last 18 months and the celebration of our students. They have worked so hard.
Exams will not take place as planned in May and June.
What?
This was the moment Mrs. Kader learnt of the first lockdown. Last year, the government replaced exams with a controversial algorithm which had to be scrapped. This year, grades were assessed by teachers, but schools were only given 12 weeks to prepare.
Personally, I prefer to go back to exams. I think it's a problem having teacher assessment where one school might be assessing differently to another school. There was no moderation or standardisation across the nation to make sure that a grade 9 in this school is the same as a grade 9 evidence folder in another school.
3, 2, 1 and go!
The schools minister says exams will be back in England next year, with adjustments to make them fairer. This after today's results show again private schools and grammars are outperforming comprehensives.
A huge relief for many of the students here. They've had both years of their GCSEs disrupted by COVID with lockdown lessons and learning. Last year, they missed 14 weeks of face-to-face teaching. This year, it was 8 weeks. That's according to analysis by the Labour Party. And children in the north lost a week more of classroom teaching than children in the south.
What I want to see is a first-class education for every child, whoever they are and wherever they come from. What we've seen today is baked-in inequality. The gap between those going to private schools and going to state schools has got bigger.
Back at Rushy Mead, time for Anjali to let her parents know how she's done.
Oh my God!
It's brilliant. I can't believe it.
The Education Secretary faces questions about his policies in the pandemic, but today, time to celebrate for the teenagers who have struggled through it.
Darshana Soni. Well, earlier I was speaking to the Education Minister, Gillian Keegan, and I began by asking her how much confidence we should have in today's results.
We should be very confident in these results. Massive well done to all students, actually, who've picked up their results this week. If you consider that they've had to overcome the biggest disruption in education since the Second World War, and everybody's had to adapt to new ways of doing things, the teachers have done an amazing job. But each one of these results has been evidenced by the work of the student, either through mock exams or assessments or a whole range of things that teachers have used to evidence the knowledge that students have and their ability, and obviously the grades reflect that.
This system was forced on us by the pandemic and by all the disruption. And if that's the case, people must be wondering why the government is so against going back to a mixture of coursework and exams?
Well, we have different courses, and we're not only celebrating A-levels and GCSEs, which get the mountain of airtime, but also BTECs and many other vocational and technical qualifications, all of which actually do have a lot of modular assessment along the way and a lot of coursework. So there is a whole range of options and choices at both level 2 and at level 3. But when they looked at the GCSE system, what they found, and when these were reforms that took place over the last few years, I think 2015-16, what they found was that there was more of the teaching time was going on the coursework, and actually it was taking up too much teaching time. So that's why we went back to the system, which was the system that we had in our day probably, which was where it was largely exams and then coursework for those subjects that require coursework.
Are you fundamentally opposed to teacher assessment then?
Oh, no. I mean, obviously, exams are the fairest system. That is something that we all know. They are the fairest system. They're the fairest way to assess a young person's ability. But as you said, the disruption, it would have been very unfair to do exams because the disruption was unequal. It was in different parts of the country, different types of school. It would have been very unfair on certain students to do exams, which is why we've had this broad range of evidence. The teachers who know their students best have been put in that place. And a massive thank you to them. They've really stood up that system.
But there are some bleak realities here. And one is the absolute confirmation that, yes, London is doing very well, but the North is doing badly. And we know why. It's inequality. And you said you were going to be dealing with inequality. You've been in power a very long time. Inequality is not improving.
Inequality actually was improving, and there's two measures of that. So since 2011 up to 2019, so until the pandemic, we'd actually narrowed the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and other pupils. So at the age of 11, we'd narrowed it by 13%, and the age of 16, we'd narrowed it by 9%.
But we're talking about today. We're talking about today, and the figures do not look good.
It has been put off track a bit by the pandemic. I think that's for sure true. And whilst we did everything we could, tried to get devices out to disadvantaged pupils, tried to get, BBC Bite-Size, the Oak National Academy, there's about 100 million views of lessons now that everybody's had. But of course, there was an uneven disruption at the beginning. It took us a while to respond. Inequality is there in this country. There is absolutely no doubt. And you see it not just in cities and towns, you see it in coastal areas, you see it in the north versus the south, you see it in rural areas as well.
So what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it?
That's why levelling up is at the very heart of everything we're doing. That's why we're focused on making sure everybody gets access to a really good or outstanding education.